They always said the heroes are the men that didn't come home. I'm no hero.
A Bartlesville man is recording the stories of hundreds of Oklahoma veterans. Joe Todd has spent 2 decades interviewing veterans.
About 1,000 of his World War II interviews are now stored at the Eisenhower Presidential Library. News on 6's Amy Slanchik tells us more about Todd's work in an Oklahoma's own original report.
Chapter 1 in the dramatic story of the USS Hornet, commissioned just 7 weeks before Pearl Harbor, the newest of the carriers with which America went to war.
One of the guys had a little radio there. He mentioned that Japan had bombed Pearl Harbor. And I had never heard of Pearl Harbor. 4.5 months later, I was on the Hornet, 400 miles off of Japan, and we were sending Jimmy Doolittle and his group over to kick some butts.
He was an excellent interviewer. He was so proud to be on the Hornet.
Willard Lyons, who settled in Bartlesville after 20 years with the Navy, is one of hundreds of veterans Joe Todd has interviewed. Joe worked at the Oklahoma Historical Society throughout the 70s, 80s, and 90s. Just before retiring in 2001, Joe says he was in the archives and ran into a staff member visiting from the Eisenhower Presidential Library.
And he said, I'm frustrated. We're losing these World War II veterans, not getting their stories.
That was the beginning of his relationship with the library, which is in Abilene, Kansas, where President Eisenhower grew up.
We're just outside the stacks at the Eisenhower Library. It extends several levels, and only a handful of people with the library are allowed inside for security reasons. And it's where hundreds of Joe's veteran interviews are stored.
The great thing about these interviews is you get to then document those individual efforts that became the entire war effort, that became the American, victory in World War II.
As the library's supervisory archivist, Jim Ginther is one of those few people who can go back in the stacks to access materials for people who make appointments.
On the Arizona.
So he signed all these.
Oh my.
During our visit, Joe brought his latest contribution to the library, pictures he collected that go along with the veterans' memories. And while they each have their own story, Joe says there is a common theme.
Virtually everyone says, I'll do it again. Some of these guys survived the Bataan Death March. They survived plane crashes. They all said, I'll do it again for my country.
Joe has interviewed more than 1,200 World War II veterans. His interviews with veterans from World War I, Vietnam, Korea, Desert Storm, and Afghanistan are stored at the Oklahoma Historical Society. Many are Oklahomans, but he'll meet someone just about anywhere, as long as they're willing to talk.
There are a few that just flat will not be interviewed. I have tried and tried, and if they say that they don't want to be interviewed, I just back off.
But don't mistake that for a lack of persistence.
There's only one I went after, and he was trapped inside the USS Oklahoma, and I said, your story is unique. We need your story. And he said, I don't want to talk about it, and I would call him about once a month. Finally, he said, what will it take for you to leave me alone? I said, let me interview you. And he said, be here tomorrow. So I drove to Fort Worth, interviewed him, and he said, do not call me again. I said, yes, sir.
Perhaps one reason veterans are willing to share their war stories with Joe is because he himself is a veteran. He joined the Army in 1966, was a helicopter mechanic in Vietnam, and helped protect civilians during Desert Storm. Joe is still doing interviews and thinks about the people he's already interviewed often. He stays in touch with some of their families.
Daddy was on the Hornet when it was attacked by the Japanese, and he had to abandon ship.
Marjorie Lyons Smith is Willard's daughter. He died in 2018, years after Joe sat down with him.
I didn't realize then how important it would be to me years later.
Important to her and important to history.
It is the cliche, if we forget the past, we're damned to relive it.
In Abilene, Kansas, Amy Slanchik, Oklahoma's own, News on 6.
And Joe was inducted into the Oklahoma Military Hall of Fame just a few days ago.